It's the Metro on WDET in the D. I'm Robin Vincent.
And I'm Tia Graham. Today on the program, we unravel the historical and social threads of what once was known as Devil's Night.
Plus, with Halloween upon us, we're getting into some spooky conversations this week. Up first, is the main branch of the Detroit Public Library haunted? WDET investigates.
Strokes chin. And we get some last-minute clarity on the crowded field of candidates running for Detroit's school board race.
But first, Tia, we need to talk a little more about this election, specifically about what it looks like in Michigan. We've seen both former President Donald Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris making lots of stops all over our state.
Yes, Robin, that is right. Michigan is critical for these candidates to win if they want to be president. Yesterday, a poll by The Hill showed the vice president ahead by 5 points. But polling has generally been very tight. Most political scientists believe this election could easily go either way. To discuss why the election is so tight in Michigan and how voters are feeling right now, we have Matt Grossman here. He leads the Institute for Public Policy and Social Research and is a political science professor at Michigan State. Matt, welcome to the Metro.
Thanks. Great to be with you.
Of course. Matt, people are really anxious around Michigan right now. You're seeing a lot of Trump signs, some Harris signs, but things are pretty tense. There were several ballot boxes in Oregon and Washington that were recently set on fire. So to the best of your reading, where are Michigan voters at right now?
This is the closest the polls have ever been. They're within 1 point in the average in Michigan, as well as in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. Michigan is quite likely to be up there as a potential tipping point state in the national election. So it's close Michigan, it's close nationally, and the polls are off on average by about 4 to 5 points. So it could easily go in either direction.
When you say, Matt, this is Robin, when you say the polls are the closest they've ever been, you're saying historically speaking, since when?
Since we've been doing averages of the polling in the middle part of the 20th century, we've never had the polls nationally and in all of the critical states, to be within a point in the average.
And based on your reading and everything you've been going through, why is it so close, especially in Michigan?
Well, Michigan is near the national electorate and has been really since the 1980s, and obviously was one of the three states that moved toward Trump unexpectedly in 2016 and then moved back to Biden in 2020. So we've been at the top of everybody's list of competition for some time. The sort of fundamentals models of the election were also predicting a close election from the beginning. We have, just from economic statistics, you'd expect a pretty tight race, and it's remained that way for the whole election.
And Matt, you literally just talked about how Biden took it in 2020, and then you had Trump in 2016. So Michigan did go the way of Democrats in 2018, 2020, as well as 2022. But things seem a little bit shakier for Democrats right now. Why do you think that is? Do you think it has anything to do with the messaging?
The electorate is different in the midterms, so I would say that's a little bit different. You tend not to get the same broad swath of voters participate in a midterm, and we obviously had the abortion initiative and a governor's race dominated by that in 2022. So Michigan did look more Democratic than the nation as a whole in 2022. It's possible that will continue in 2024, but right now the polls don't show it. In terms of the messaging, both candidates have, as you said, been here the second most of any state. They've spent the second most money of anywhere in Michigan, which is hundreds of millions of dollars. So they have been able to get out all of their messages to Michigan voters. And the Democrats are not making the presumed error that they made in 2016, which was to not run a Michigan-specific campaign. They've been in here the whole time and talking a lot about the auto industry and their commitments to the state.
And young people vote in lower numbers than older folks, as historically known, but about 50% of young people voted in 2020 compared to 39% in 2016, which is a large increase. Does it seem like young people will come out and vote in this election?
Yes, young people definitely vote at lower rates than the rest of the population, but Michigan did stand out for its high rate of young people's participation both in 2020 and in 2022. If you model it based on the turnout so far this year, in the primaries, you would expect a lower turnout than in 2020, although higher than 2016. But, we do have a lot of changes to voting laws, like in-person early voting, and a lot of votes cast so far. So we don't actually know. But, yes, young people are among the most peripheral voters, so they will turn out if there's an overall high turnout.
It's the Metro on WDET-FM. I'm Robin Vincent alongside Tia Graham. We're speaking with Michigan State political science professor Matt Grossman about why polling among Michiganders is so close in the presidential race. Now, Matt, the big cities, Detroit and Grand Rapids, Warren and Dearborn, generally vote for Democrats. If those areas, including nearby suburbs, vote for Harris, what's the likelihood you think that she takes Michigan?
Well, you're right. There has been kind of a transformation in the electorate. If you look at the way that Bill Clinton won Michigan in the 1990s, you see a lot of blue areas in upper Michigan, even in the UP. And now if you just look at the map of 2020, it's just a map of density. The denser areas voted more Democratic. And the less dense areas voted more Republican. But along with those moves in the cities, what you've seen is moves in the rural areas moving even further towards Republicans, and even in the exurban areas moving towards Republicans. So it's not enough just to get support in the cities or close-in suburbs. You have to kind of fight it out in that area in between.
Now, the Harris campaign has been running on things like abortion rights and against what they've described as Trump's fascist tendencies. Meanwhile, Trump is running against immigration and against Harris's foreign policy stances. How important are these issues to the election?
Well, the overall issue profile is important, but we don't necessarily want to take people's word for it when they say, they voted on immigration, that they voted on abortion. If they voted Democratic or Republican in the last 5 elections, chances are they're still voting that way in this election.
Sure.
So it's useful to look at the people in the middle and what they're prioritizing. And that's kind of where the incumbent party, the Democrats, are in some trouble, that a lot of people are focused on inflation and the economy, and incumbent parties throughout the world have not been doing very well in the post-COVID inflationary economy. So that's a headwind overall that the Democrats are facing.
And Matt, this is Tia coming back into the conversation. So who are the voters that could decide this election? There are a lot of talk of suburban moms being the swing voters around the country. So is that true for Michigan as well?
Well, in an election this close, any margin change has the potential to change the outcome. So even voters that vote at high rates for one of the parties can still, a little bit of swing can make a difference. So, for example, in national polls and in Michigan polls, there is some showing that black voters will not support Harris at the rates that they supported Biden last time. Even if it's from 90 to 82, that would be enough to sway the statewide electorate. Arab American voters, of course, have gotten lots of attention. In Michigan, it's about 3 to 4%. But, if they make a big shift, again, that could also sway the election.
Yeah, and just thinking about that shift, you just talked a little bit about it, but I would love to go into it a little bit more, especially when we talk about this southeastern Michigan, Detroit area. You talked about black voters and Arab voters as well. But what are you seeing from all of the groups throughout the city of Detroit and Metro Detroit in terms of the shifts that you're seeing from Democrat to Republican or vice versa?
Well, there could be a lot of change in the Metro Detroit area. And, we get asked all the time for bellwether counties. Obviously, Wayne County is not a bellwether in the sense that we know it's going to go Democratic. But enough shifts there could make a difference in the statewide election. There's a lot of question about whether this low levels of reported support among black voters in polls relative to 2020 will actually materialize on Election Day. There's some evidence that last time there was sort of reluctance to support Biden that didn't necessarily show up on Election Day, although Trump did get more votes in the city of Detroit in 2020 than in 2016. But I think, that there are signs in the polls that there is some decline, especially among younger Black men. Among the Arab American community, I think people may not realize how much of a swing constituency this is to start out with. In the 2022 election, the Dearborn area actually moved Republican while the rest of the state was moving towards Democrats. And it was pre-Gaza. It had nothing to do with foreign policy. It was about LGBT books in schools and post-COVID pandemic policies. So it's a constituency that is normally split, has a lot of conservative voters, and complaints about the Biden administration could be enough to shift some of them over this time.
And Matt, my last question to you, honestly, you said that this is as they get older, white Americans are more likely to vote for Republicans and Black Americans are more likely to vote for Democrats. What explains this political shift for each group?
Yeah, so people think about older people as being more Republican than younger people, but that is actually the opposite relationship for African Americans, both in Michigan and nationally. The usual explanation that's given is about the history of the civil rights movement and voters' ties to the Democratic Party being stronger among the older population. So another way of looking at it is you can have quite conservative older African Americans who are still consistent Democratic voters, but once you get to the younger population, that there's more of them that will split off if they hold conservative positions on social issues and economic issues.
That is very interesting. As soon as you said it, I thought maybe they just have more of a field, a wide open field to actually let that happen. Matt, thank you so much for joining us on the Metro. Matt Grossman is the director of the Institute for Public Policy and Social Research and a professor of political science at Michigan State University, my alma mater. Thank you so much for joining us on the Metro.
Thank you.
From the WDET newsroom in Michigan, Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s name remains on the presidential ballots. The U.S. Supreme Court rejected his emergency appeal to have his name removed from the ballot after he ended his independent campaign and endorsed former President Donald Trump.
Coming up, there are a lot of candidates running for the Detroit School Board. We'll talk with someone who can break down those dynamics and dive deeper into who the candidates are. Stay right there. Welcome back to the Metro on 101.9 WDET FM. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Robin Vincent. Today, we continue our discussions about the Detroit School Board race. That's because early voting is underway. And we've heard from some of you that with more than 20 candidates vying for 3 seats, people are feeling overwhelmed with all the choices. So to break down the race and what we know about the candidates, we've got Lori Higgins on the line. Lori is the bureau chief for Chalkbeat Detroit, a local nonprofit newsroom that specializes in education journalism. Lori, welcome to the Metro.
Hi, Robin. Thanks for having me.
So first, Lori, could you describe what the dynamics are like on the Detroit School Board right now and how this race could really change those dynamics?
Sure. So it's a 7-member board, and generally the board is pretty supportive of the administration efforts to turn around the school district. And with 3 seats open, that could change the dynamic on the board, and that could, depending on who gets elected, that could change the direction that the district goes in the future.
And we know one of the priorities of Superintendent Nick Lividi has really been improving culture and climate. I've heard you use those words a lot when describing some of the main focuses that he really has. And I wonder if you could talk about what that even means.
Sure. Culture and climate, this is when you're looking at how satisfied people are in the schools, how satisfied are teachers, are they working well together, what the dynamic is between teachers and administrators. There can sometimes be a change or issues with the culture and climate just in those relationships, and that can impact teachers. We saw that pretty clearly earlier this year when a number of teachers came to the school board to complain about a principal at a particular elementary school. And it also, the culture and climate also affects students because, if the adults in the school are not happy and are not getting along together, that's going to affect how well the schools are learned or the students are learning.
Sure, that makes sense. Now back to the candidates. There are more than 20, and they're after 3 seats, as we have both pointed out. Could you talk about some of those candidates who you think might really shake things up if they were to get a seat on the Detroit School Board?
I honestly think that all of them have the potential to do that. There are 22 names on the ballot. It's important to note that one candidate, Jason Malone, is not really running because of an injury that he suffered. But I tend to think of there being really 16 serious candidates. These are people who have consistently been part of forums that have been held, people who responded to our candidate survey. There are some candidates who have just not responded to any communication from us, probably from others as well. So I think there's a really diverse mix of candidates running. You have one incumbent, Sherry Gay Dagnogo, who is running for re-election. She has real name recognition, not just because she's an incumbent, but also because she's very active in the community. She also served in the legislature for a while. And beyond her, the name recognition really depends on where you are in the community. I do think that there is a candidate, Ida Short, that might have an advantage because she did receive a special designation on the ballot that identifies her as an educator. And we know that from previous experience back in 2016, Georgia Lemons was a candidate for the board. She came in second place. She had a quote-unquote certified educator next to her name, certified teacher. And that really does make a difference if you're going to vote and you don't know anything about the candidates and you see someone as a certified educator or an educator. That may make some people think, okay, well, this person knows about schools and this person knows about education, so This is probably a safe vote. There are a number of former educators or current educators running for the school board. We have Nicole Conaway, who is a longtime teacher in the school district, who was recently terminated from the district because she has raised concerns about teaching in person because of health issues that she has. We have
so she might deepen some division on the board, or create some division on the board, I should say.
Absolutely. She is part of. There are a few candidates who are part of the By Any Means Necessary advocacy group that is very vocal and active on education issues, and they have, and she in particular has been critical of Dr. Vitti. Yep. You also have Aaliyah Moore, who is a parent. She's self-employed, very, very active. She is at pretty much every school board meeting. She speaks during every school board meeting. She is very vocal, very much wanting the board to hear her thoughts on how the board is operating. And she's been very critical of the board for not pushing back enough on VD's policies. So you also have some community leaders. There's a lawyer who's a partner in the Dykema law firm. You have Sharice Butler, who heads up the I'm drawing a blank now, but the group that does a lot of work bringing in tutors, people who come into the schools to help students. And I apologize for drawing a blank on their name, but
City Year, is that right?
City Year, that's it. Yeah, I'm sorry. Thank you, Robin. And there's a retired DPSCD teacher. I think that's Victor Gibson. There are a number of there's the president of the Bagley Community Council. There are just a number of people that that show how diverse the field of candidates are.
Sure.
So and there are quite a few that are I would consider to be very much opposed to the direction that the district is going in right now. And so if any of those people get seats on the board, that could create a little bit of challenge for the district moving forward. Again, if 4 out of the 7 board members are still pretty much in line and supportive of the district's direction, 3 who aren't will not necessarily change things because, the administration would still have 4 votes. But it could create a little bit of adversity on the board. And that's something that you kind of administrators tend to want to avoid having a lot of dissension on the board.
Sure, it could really put things at a bit of a standstill. If you're just joining us, this is The Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent alongside Tia Graham. We're speaking with Lori Higgins. She's the bureau chief for Chalkbeat Detroit, a local nonprofit newsroom that specializes in education. And we're making some sense of the crowded field for the Detroit school board race. Now, Lori, you mentioned the candidate forum that both Chalkbeat and WDET hosted. I wonder if there were any moments that really stood out to you during that recent forum.
Sure. I think for me, because we did focus a majority of the questions on chronic absenteeism, it was really interesting to see that so many of the candidates actually understood the issue in a way that that would make a difference if make a difference in the efforts to improve chronic absenteeism. And what I mean by that is there are a lot of sort of narratives about chronic absenteeism that tend to put the blame on the parents. And we know from research, we know from our reporting that there are a lot of factors that affect chronic absenteeism, poverty being the biggest one. And we also know that, there are parents who may not be doing their kids a good service by not making sure they're getting to school every day. But there are a lot of parents with a lot of extreme challenges that they are dealing with that are very difficult when it comes to getting their kids to school every day. So I was struck by the fact that many of the candidates seem to have an understanding that the community, that the school district needs to address these issues as a way to improve chronic absenteeism. Now, there were a couple that, were very much feeling like we needed to put the pressure on parents.
Sure.
And that is a feeling that a lot of people have. But for the most part, I think people were focused on those issues. Are we going to solve poverty? Probably not, but we can maybe address some of the issues that are making it more difficult for kids to get to school every day, like transportation.
Right. And housing, healthcare. The fact that a lot of those candidates understood that chronic absenteeism is a deep systemic issue feels really important. Now, Chalkbeat worked on an in-depth voter guide about school board candidates that people can go to and get more into the nitty-gritty of what we've been talking about here. Just tell me a few quick things that people can learn when they look at that guide.
Sure. Well, you can learn a lot about the backgrounds of the candidates, what they do, their experience in education, that kind of biographical information that I think is really important, that I think may for some voters be the thing that makes them decide, I want to vote for this person. But we also asked them a number of questions that I think are really important. We did ask about chronic absenteeism, of course, but we also asked them about what their priorities would be as school board members. We asked them about addressing enrollment in the district. As you know, enrollment is rebounding a little bit this year from all accounts, but, the district has been impacted by pandemic-related enrollment declines. And there are, the question I think we asked was, how do you attract students back to the school district? We also asked them about academic improvement. Again, the district has made, improvements on the state standardized test, the MSTEP, but performance is still it's still pretty low compared to the state average.
Yep.
And that is an issue that the district is working on, has been working on for a number of years, and will be crucial, for any board member who gets elected to work together with their fellow board members to set policies or programs that will address the academic achievement.
That's right. You can find that in-depth voter guide from Chalkbeat Detroit at wdet.org in our voter guide section, or at chalkbeatdetroit.org. Did I say that right, Lori? I believe it's actually, tell me the correct web address.
I know we had this conversation a couple weeks ago, and I think you were actually right. It's chalkbeat.org/Detroit.
Thank you. Lori Higgins is the bureau chief for Chalkbeat Detroit, a local nonprofit newsroom specializing in education. Lori, thank you so much for joining the Metro.
Thanks, Robin. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Now, Tia, we've had several conversations on this show about the school board race, but this last one, it was inspired by a listener, right?
Yes, indeed. So in the Midtown area, we have a local market called Seasons Market. And I walked in, and one of my favorite people were working there. And she's like, hey, I love the show, love what you guys are talking about. However, I don't know anything about all of these candidates for the race for the Detroit School Board. And so I would love to know more. And here on the Metro, we want to make sure that we give the community the tools they need to be informed, the news you can use, and make informed decisions.
Yeah. It's one of journalism's higher purposes, one of the reasons I think we feel a lot of pride for our work. So on that note, I want to remind folks that we're always interested in your ideas, what you think we should cover, or what should be part of the conversation but isn't.
Indeed, Robin. So if you are interested, you can share your ideas with us by downloading the WDET app and using the open mic feature. It's super easy. Let us know what we need to know. As well, from the newsroom, from the WDET newsroom, a federal bankruptcy judge approves the sale of Tupperware brands, setting the stage for the company to leave Chapter 11 protection. Customers will be able to buy products online and through long-time independent salespeople. And tomorrow is Halloween, Robin. We're almost there. And I don't know about you, but I'm always haunted. Like, I go into my apartment, I'm opening up the cabinet, Tupperware on me. That's what haunts me.
The Tupperware falling on your head. I mean, I'm haunted by that too, and I'll say a lot of other things. And to that end, how about the spirits haunting Detroit's main library? Coming up, WDET's Jeff Milo went there to find out what's going on ahead of Halloween. Welcome back to the Metro on WDET. In the D, I'm Robin Vincent.
And I'm Tia Graham. And some Americans have long believed that libraries are hot spots for ghosts, even before Ghostbusters.
I mean, it seems like a fun thing to believe in, imagining the spirits that call libraries their home. It's always made my book browsing a little bit more adventurous. Tia, have you had any ghostly experiences in the aisles?
Well, graduating from Michigan State, I would often go to the main library, do a little studying, a little getting ready for midterms, finals, whatever it may be. I would choose this one particular area, very, very quiet. However, it just felt very like something's watching you. It always feels like, somebody's watching me. Yeah, that's what it felt like in that library all the time.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, of course. It's that time of year, spooky season.
I felt the spirits at the Walter Reuther Library on Wayne State's campus. That's a pretty historic spot. I sensed something in there for sure, and it's really easy to get away from people in there and find yourself in these abandoned aisles.
Exactly.
And yeah, I know I'm not the only one who's felt something in the Walter Reuther Library.
Not at all. The stories of haunted places like libraries have piqued WDET's Jeff Milo's interest. Of course it did. The idea took him to the Detroit Public Library's main branch on Woodward to find all the spooky things happening there.
And that became WDET's most recent Curiosity episode, which began with a question from listener Ann Cable.
Well, I think spirits like to live on in their favorite places, and I think a library is one of the favorite places of a lot of people. I've also saw a video on probably YouTube of a ghost cat in the basement of this building. When I saw the video, you could see this almost transparent cat running across the floor into the stacks in the basement of this library.
Along with ghost cats, there have also been whispered stories of the specter of a little girl looking for her doll, strange footsteps coming up from behind, and disembodied voices. Even the potential of a cursed book tied to an infamous unsolved murder. As a humble ghost-hunting duo, we entered the library.
We're walking deeper into the library. I kind of already feel like it might be haunted, but in a good way.
I feel like I'm walking into hallowed halls, full of knowledge, full of history, full of possibilities.
That makes me want to sit down and read a book. Almost I don't even want to finish the report. I just want to put my feet up right now. But I also want to find some ghosts.
We were particularly in search of two library staff members, Cully Summers and Katie Dalgowitz, who together have more than 40 years of experience working inside DPL and have also heard quite a few stories, often firsthand accounts. Cully told us of a staff member who recently passed away, who by his account was a self-described witch who once gifted him an evil eye talisman for protection.
And she was a clerk in the Burton Historical Collection, and she would tell me when I started here that there was a gateway to hell in B level, and that her job here was to protect that gateway and stop everything from coming out into the world.
We conducted our interview on the third floor of the library, which, according to Cully, is one of the most haunted.
Well, I think just because it's the older part of the library, and a lot of my staff have related stories about hearing noises in the walls or seeing shadows or footsteps in the stacks. And so this area, although I haven't personally seen it, seems to be very active.
Katie, DPL's public relations specialist, has also heard stories about the third floor.
Footsteps in the stacks, like knocking sounds, feeling that someone is behind you and then you look, or seeing some figure out of the corner of your eye, and when the staff member tries to go and tell someone, hey, this is a stack, you can't be here, there isn't anyone there.
Katie admitted that she's yet to see a ghost herself, but she's hoping to one day. Suffice to say, she's very interested in the subject and even recommended a book for us.
I was kind of interested when Katie had showed me the excerpts from Haunted Detroit, a book written about, and there's a chapter on the library, and that someone had mentioned the shadow of a little girl. And when I had spoken with one of my staff members, they related a story to me of the same kind of thing, where they had seen a little girl like in a midi dress with a bow in her hair, and she said, "Where's my doll?" and then disappeared. And it, when he told me the story, it was, shook me enough. But then when I had seen that other people had related that too, that kind of corroborated it and made it even more interesting to me.
But I couldn't help wondering whether there were any accounts involving a cursed book on the shelves at the Detroit Public Library.
This is more of like a creepy coincidence, but there was those Evangelista occult murders that were never solved back in 1929. And 2 years before, Benny Evangelista actually came to the main library here and brought and donated a signed copy of his book that still resides in the collection. And the book has a great title. It's called The Oldest History of the World Discovered by Occult Science in Detroit, Michigan. I mean, this could be a really fascinating book to read. So anyway, he donated the book, he signed it, he brought his copy here, and then of course 2 years later he was found in his home with his beheaded. His wife and his 4 children were also found upstairs dead, and it remains one of Detroit's unsolved murder mysteries to this day.
So I asked Cully why anyone would think a library might be haunted, and he had some thoughts on that.
Well, I think that any old building like this, especially, people tend to see it in that way. But I think also the collecting of history, and that there's arcane knowledge that exists, and that it's somewhere within the library, and that somehow these things kind of leave the pages and start to inhabit the building itself.
But isn't a library a sort of liminal space? Maybe even a way station of energies, personalities, and experiences? For decades, people have come to the library for something, for knowledge, for help, for connection. As a public service, it's literally here for everyone. And maybe some just haven't ever left.
Number of people who've just wandered through these doors through all that time, and the different things that they've been searching for or needed help with. I mean, when the library was built, this area was basically fields and a few homes, and it wasn't the Midtown Cultural Center that it is today. And so, people had to expend some energy to get to this, giant temple of knowledge and, seek out what they needed. And we're open for everyone, and there's a lot of energy and a lot of individuals coming through our doors constantly. And so, yeah, maybe that's being picked up on, maybe that's being left. The public library is a great institution, and the fact that we can provide these services to whoever is a great thing.
It's nearly Halloween. And remember that if you're ever looking to learn more on the subject of ghosts, you can find it here on the shelves of your local library.
That was WDET's Jeff Milo answering a listener question for Curiosity about whether Detroit's main library branch is haunted. You can find more episodes of Curiosity at WDET.org.
Coming up, the day before Halloween used to be pretty dangerous in Detroit. We'll learn more about that history and why so-called Devil's Night is no longer a thing.
Welcome back to the Metro. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Robin Vincent. So, Tia, you're turning back the pages of recent history for us with this next segment.
Indeed, Robin. The city of Detroit had a problem that used to happen annually on this day, actually. The day before Halloween used to be called Devil's Night. That night filled many with fear as neighborhoods with abandoned buildings and abandoned homes prepared themselves for possible arson. And while there was serious damage caused by Devil's Night, the fear was heightened further by media coverage of Detroit, perpetuating dangerous stereotypes about Black people in the city. And now, in 2024, there are kids and young people who have no clue what Devil's Night was or how community groups and police helped change the narrative. So how did Devil's Night come to an end? And what are the lessons we can take from that time in history? Joining us now on the Metro to discuss is City of Detroit historian Jamon Jordan. Jamon, welcome to the Metro.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Of course. So getting right into things, what is the history of Devil's Night in Detroit, now known as Angel's Night or Halloween in the D?
Yes. So for a long time, throughout this country, really, there has been mischief or vandalism or some kind of prank associated with the Halloween season. So either Halloween itself or the day before or a couple of days before or a couple of days after throughout this country, there's been people who played pranks, toilet papered your house, maybe egged your car, move your furniture around in your house, those kinds of things. And of course, maybe even a little bit more serious, busting out windows of the teacher that they didn't like around the Halloween season. And in some places in this country, it was known as Mischief Night. But in the Midwest, especially in Michigan, and especially Detroit, it was known as Devil's Night. And it generally occurred the day before Halloween itself. And for many years, it was the normal kind of pranks that I said before that are similarly in the East Coast and in other parts of the country. People toilet papering people's houses, people, throwing eggs at people's houses and things like that. Those kind of somewhat harmless kinds of pranks.
And in the city of Detroit, I'm so sorry. Go ahead, Jamon. I was going to say,
by the 70s, it got much more serious by the 1970s.
That was literally my next question as we were going to segue. So when did we see it hit its peak? When we start to see those pranks, seemingly harmless pranks at first, grow into something that was much larger and started to hit the radar of police as well as the neighbors?
Yeah. So in the 1970s, when Detroit, of course, is in a strong period of white flight, and at this point, really kind of the beginning of African-American middle-class flight from the city of Detroit. And so now you're beginning to see a rise in abandoned structures. So now you have much more vacant houses and much more vacant buildings than you had in the early period of Mischief Night or Devil's Night. And so now these homes that may have been getting egged before, they're vacant. And so now people are beginning to set fire. So some of the pranksters are now burning down vacant houses, vacant buildings that are in their neighborhood. And, of course, sadly, some of those vacant buildings and vacant houses catch on to homes that are occupied or buildings that are occupied. So these fires become a major problem for the city of Detroit. And by the 1980s, some of the years there are nearly or even in some cases above 800 fires around Halloween, some a few days before, some actually on the night of Halloween, and some a day or two after Halloween. And so the whole period begins being called Devil's Night, not just the night before, but the whole area, the whole time period around Halloween is being called Devil's Night because of these horrible fires.
And Jamon,
so by the mid-'80s, it's really at its peak.
And Jamon, we talk about the peak. We see the increases happening. You said up to 800 within that week that was considered Devil's Night. So what caused the increase in violent acts on the night and in the days that led up to Halloween, especially knowing it began with harmless pranks? We talked a little bit earlier as well, and you talked about how there were community members as well who saw these abandoned buildings, abandoned homes, and thought to themselves, we have to do something.
That's right. So you have a few things happening. Of course, you have the pranksters. And so a significant number of these fires are being caused by people who originally, that same group of people or that same class of people, same age group, really young teenage, mainly males, you have them starting to move from throwing eggs to starting fires. But then they're joined by other people. One section of people they're being joined by are people who are upset about all of these vacant homes in their community that aren't being demolished. And so they are clandestinely joining the pranksters around that time period because, of course, they can cloak their actions because there's so many fires happening at that time period anyway, that they're burning down these vacant buildings, that they're eyesores, they're problems in their neighborhood. And, of course, by the mid-'80s, you also have the crack cocaine problem, and because many drug dealers are taking over these vacant homes, another way that some people in the neighborhood are responding to these vacant houses and these vacant structures to keep drug dealers out is to burn them down around that time period. So that's joining the pranks. And then, of course, you have people who own properties who can't sell them and get a fair price for them, and so they are collecting insurance. So you have all of that playing a part in the upscale of fires during the mid-'80s. during the Devil's Night period. And, of course, the other party is the city of Detroit had a number of massive layoffs of city workers, including firefighters and police officers in the 1980s. So a fire might start as one structure, but because there's not enough manpower to put out all of these fires, they're catching on to other structures. So a fire that started out as one fire is now 3 structures burned down. And so that's another reason for the rise. So all of these things play a part in how Devil's Night became a horrible period, particularly by the 1980s in the city of Detroit.
Yeah, so if you're just joining us, you're listening to the Metro on 1019 WDET. I'm Tia Graham with Robin Vincent across from me, and we're chatting with the city of Detroit historian Jamon Jordan about the night before Halloween, formerly known as Devil's Night. And we do have an audio cut of a City of Detroit public service announcement from 1995 about what people can do to prevent arson before Halloween.
In many ways, the future of Detroit depends upon efforts to eliminate Devil's Night arson. Its success will help put an end to the senseless destruction of property, negative press, and sometimes loss of life. So what's involved in the 1995 Devil's Night anti-arson campaign? There are 7 main areas in which volunteers are needed. You choose the one which best fits your abilities. The 7 areas are Adopt a House program, Neighborhood Patrol, Porch Light program, Logistical support, the youth component, Eyes and Ears, and the Orange Ribbon campaign.
Wow. And, just taking a step back, listening to that, I remember the Orange Ribbon campaign as soon as I heard that. So what did the Archer administration do to change the conversation about Devil's Night? We spoke a little bit earlier that transition started to change. We saw the branding of it change as well, the naming of it. So when did we start to see that?
Yeah, so a few things happened. Number one, by the late 80s, there are people in their own communities who have begun patrolling their neighborhoods. They're tired of the fires. And they're, of course, tired of taking a chance at their own home being ignited by fires because of Devil's Night. So some people have begun doing this on their own with they didn't work with the city at first. They just did it because they cared about their own streets, their own homes, their own neighborhoods. So you have that happening. And then the mayor at the time, Mayor Coleman Young, is beginning to use the curfew to enforce children being off the streets and young people being off the streets. So those two things are working at the same time, although not necessarily being coordinated together. By the 90s, there begins to be some coordination between what the city is trying to do to tamp down these fires and what community people have already been doing to try to stop fires in their own communities. And 1994 was a horrible year. Mm-hmm. So when we get that PSA that you just played from 1995, it's partly a response to the year before, which was a horrible resurgence of 1980s level Devil's Night. And so now the mayor at this time is Dennis Archer, and he's going to make the full merger between the city's efforts to try to tamp down the fires in Devil's Night and what community folks have already been doing. And so those two things will merge together, and by 1997, they'll rename it Angels Night. They'll give it a new name, but it is now people working in concert with the city, in concert with the police department. They even have the lights on their cars, and they are able to drive around the community. They have CBs where they can talk directly to police officers and tell them, hey, there's a fire starting, or there's some people going into a vacant home. It looks like they may be starting a fire. They're able to do that in their communities, and of course the police officers are out during that time period enforcing the curfew as well. So these things begin to work in concert with one another, and there's thousands of people who would begin to volunteer by this point. And with so many people out on the street with eyes on almost every neighborhood, especially the vacant houses in the neighborhood, it begins to have an effect on stopping the fires. And within a few years, the fires really go way, way down, and then eventually we don't even talk about Devil's Night as a theme anymore.
Yes, Jamon, this is exactly the perfect ending for the conversation. I just want to say thank you so much for filling us in and giving us the history and the background of the importance of what once was Devil Nights and how we do not want to go back and return that in the city of Detroit. Jamon Jordan is the official historian for the city of Detroit. Jamon, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
That's the Metro for Wednesday, October 30th. The show is produced by Sam Corey, David Lyons, and Jack Philbrandt. Additional support from Dorothy Jones. Our engineer is Nate Bender. Music by Sam Bobian and Will Sessions.
This is WDET-FM, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation. Thanks for listening.
We'll see you tomorrow.